Rolling.
Rolling down the river.
Yeah, I was thinking of like Limp Bizkit, and you were thinking of Elvis.
Or actually Tina Turner.
2, 3,
I'm
4.
so fucking ready.
Diamond ring.
Living on a prayer. Out of tune, that's something Bon Jovi would never be. They're far too good for that. Let's do this.
I've got so much to talk about. So
I'm sure you have.
It's going to be a fun one.
Good. Right, hang on just one sec.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
I'm a millennial.
And I'm Gen X.
We've got the same dad.
But we didn't meet until I was 30-something.
And I was a teenager. And that's fun. So this is the podcast where...
To make up for lost time, we share an album that...
Your...
brother...
should...
No!
And in this case, we're sharing it. In many cases, I'm sharing albums that I've probably known about the same amount of time that I've known you, Dave, or in quite a few cases, less time. But this is definitely something I've known for substantially longer than I've known you. We're today. I can't take this seriously.
No. So that's great. So what we're saying from The Office, you have a deeper and more mature relationship with this album than you do me. That's fine. I'm fine. Good work.
Ironically, that album is by Bon Jovi, but it is, in my defense, the album These Days, which we're going to talk about why it's a little bit different to every other Bon Jovi album out there. But first of all, Dave, I'm not, you're not coming into this without preconceptions. You've heard of Bon Jovi, the band, and you've heard of Jon Bon Jovi, the human, and you've probably been subjected to his and their music in all sorts of circumstances and probably enjoyed it guiltily at times and probably shuddered in derision at others. You tell me, what were your preconceptions of Bon Jovi a month ago before I mentioned this record?
When you said Bon Jovi, I was really pleased because, because my knowledge of Bon Jovi, tiny. They rose to prominence, I guess, sort of late 80s, 90s, at a time when I was I was a student and I was getting into The Cure, The Smiths, and New Model Army and proper cool bands like that.
Serious grown-up music, yeah.
Serious, yeah, right. For me, Bon Jovi were, I guess at that time, the kind of worst kind of poodle rock transformed into corporate North American flat anodyne rock that was just bluesy based. Very well done, but not something I was interested in because I figured they were just going to be singing about girls and not being very well off in a not very interesting way. So I basically blanked Bon Jovi until now, with two exceptions. Of course, even me, anybody, you cannot escape living the behemoth that is Living on a Prayer. So I knew that, and indeed have, of course, danced and sung along to that at weddings, etc. for the last 30 years.
Very embarrassing social engagement.
Yeah. And the other thing, Keep the Faith.
Yeah, banger.
Is the other song I knew. And the reason I knew it, I think I've wittered on about Grip before. It was the nightclub I went to religiously at Lancaster University for 2 years. Grip, if you can't realise, stands for Goth Rock Indie Pop. And it was mainly pretty cool. Cure, Smiths, etc., etc. But at the end of the night, they always played Sympathy of the Devil.
Still kind of cool, yeah.
Followed by Keep the Faith. DJ just loved it, and I loved it as well. That was my only knowledge of Bon Jovi, really, and I would shake my not inconsiderable amount of hair around to that a lot. And I think Keep the Faith is a bloody great track. So for that reason, I was like, always dismiss them, but Keep the Faith, great. I wonder if, A, stuff I've heard on the radio and turned off, which is kind of, that corporate American shit, is what it's like, or will it be actually a hinterland of interesting stuff? Much like when I say I love Elton John, people go, because then I think underneath there's a huge belly of brilliance. I was thinking, hey, maybe Bon Jovi have that same belly of brilliance.
And it's clear after you spent some time with These Days that they have. But I do think it's worth pointing out this album is a little bit of an outlier. It kind of sits between their two great commercial peaks. And I think artistically, it's by far the most interesting album they did. And there's a small but fervent segment of the internet that definitely agrees with me. And this album, it went down very, very, very differently in different parts of the world. So in America, it was kind of ignored.
Okay.
To the extent where the recent 4-hour 40th anniversary Bon Jovi documentary basically didn't mention the record at all. Yet all the fans in Europe and Australia, this was the kind of commercial peak. This is when they were on the radio most. And I think there's probably a good reason for that. This clearly is a record influenced by grunge. There's no denying that, right? There's whilst it has some tub thumping anthemic moments to it, there's always an undercurrent of kind of Springsteenian, dispossessed, everyman vibe running through it. So I kind of actually don't want to ask you. I want to delay the inevitable. I'm not ready to hear you trounce on this because I would make a pretty robust defense for Bon Jovi as a great solid rock band with some banging songs up until the mid-noughties anyway.
Okay.
But this album I do think has some artistry to it. However, given everything you know about Bon Jovi the band and Jon Bon Jovi the human, you might find some of the lyrics incongruous. So I gave you a bit of homework and I'm intrigued to see how you came out of this. Were there any lyrics, Dave, that Jon Bon Jovi sings about on this album these days that you just can't imagine him being in that situation in real life?
Yeah, well, and in fact, I didn't know much about Jon Bon Jovi, the human. But when you set me that homework, like, what is it on this album that he's singing about that clearly isn't true? I, of course, had to find out a little bit about, well, what life is he in? Top line thing you have to know, of course, is there's two themes to this album. I'm an everyman struggling with economic disaster, and I'm heartbroken. I can't speak for his childhood. I don't know if he grew up in poverty or what, but by this time he was certainly not struggling for $1 or two. Also, I didn't know this. He's been happily married to his childhood sweetheart forever, right? So all of the heartbreak stuff is guff, right? Because he's making it up. Or is he?
Yes. Well, yes and no. I mean, happily married. He's remained married. I don't know about the happy part. Because how familiar are you with the song Bed of Roses?
Literally zero.
Well, it's a very famous ballad that came out in 1992, I believe. It's on the Keep the Faith album. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of said on the record that it's very, very autobiographical, but it's basically about being a rich rock star who's hung over at the piano after a one-night stand.
Ooh,
so
that must have gone down well.
Shez
Bon Jovi.
Just if you're not familiar with this opening two verses, he's sitting here wasted and wounded at this old piano, and he's got a bottle of vodka still lodged in his head from some blonde that gave me nightmares to think that she's still in his bed. When he dreams about movies they won't make of him when he's dead. He's basically saying, he was with some blonde last night and he's glad she's run off. Then that lady sings about, now as you close your eyes, know I'll be thinking about you. Well, my mistress, she calls me to stand in her spotlight again. Tonight, I won't be alone, but that don't mean I'm not lonely. Ooh. So, I mean, he's being pretty damn open about his infidelities, if this song is as honest as it seems.
Well, or is he? Because, so the other theme of this album is poverty. And being poor, and he's clearly used to writing songs that are jack all to do with his situation. So he might just be putting himself in the mind of someone that's having an affair, because he's certainly trying to put himself in the mind of someone that is, I quote from Hey God, 2 checks from living on the streets. Yeah, I don't think Jon Bon Jovi was ever 2 checks from living on the streets.
I think he probably was when he was coming up, playing in bar bands and the whole scene on the the New Jersey thing. I think he was doing New Jersey bar bands and all that stuff, and it would have taken a bit of time. And he was hustling, like working as like a runner in a recording studio for ages, which is where he recorded his first hit, Runaway, before he even assembled a band. And I'm sure living in New York wasn't cheap even in the 80s. And I think it's highly likely that he has in his life been 2 paychecks away from living out on the street.
Okay, fine. Okay, fair enough. Maybe this is all themed from that time in his life, because then you've got in Lie to Me, rumour has it that your daddy's coming down, he's going to pay the rent. Again, Jon Bon Jovi would probably afford to pay his own rent.
Well, again, now, sure. But I mean, we could all draw on our formative experiences.
In Damned, by the time this love is over, I'll be sleeping on the streets.
Okay. Damn, do you think Jon Bon Jovi has ever been lying here beside somebody in somebody else's bed, knowing what he's doing wrong, but better left unsaid?
Well, now you've told me that story, I just don't know.
Based on Bed of Roses, I think it's highly likely that he's strayed.
I have to mention, off the theme of money, in Something to Believe In, Tonight I'll Suck My Gut In.
Yes!
Yeah, he's always been chiselled.
Do you think we're going to get a lawsuit from John?
I hope so.
Is this defamatory?
If we ever get big enough to get a lawsuit.
But yeah, do you think Jon Bon Jovi has ever sucked his gut in?
I don't think he's ever needed to. The man works out.
He does, but I bet he's done it every night before he goes on stage because he's also deeply vain, evidently.
Well, okay.
As you should be if you're a rock star.
Fair enough. And then the last one I had was in These Days, I was walking around just a face in the crowd. I don't think Jon Bon Jovi's been just a face in the crowd for a very long time either.
Well, again, he likes to think so. So the album after this record came out, they all went their separate ways and basically didn't play together for about 5 years.
All right.
And he did a solo album, which I think, there's kind of a school of thought that had that album done as well as he'd hoped. Bon Jovi might not have come back together, but it's called Destination Anywhere. Mm-hmm. And the lead single was called Midnight in Chelsea. And again, it's about him walking around in Chelsea like nobody knows, no one's bothering him. He's just another face. And he experienced that in London, he says, in a way he didn't in America, which is kind of odd to believe. But yeah, it's definitely a theme he's returned to. So I think maybe when you've had that level of adoration, enjoying a moment of not being bothered must be quite nice.
Yeah,
actually.
Sure.
So
yeah. So what are yours, Rob?
Well, yeah, there's a couple I'm surprised you didn't get. Do you think he has seen a dying man too proud to beg spit on his own grave? Is that actually physically impossible?
Probably not. And also in Hey God, the whole Born into the Ghetto 1991, Just a Happy Child playing beneath the summer sun, a vacant lot, by 12 he's got a gun, the odds are bet against him, Junior, don't make 21. There's this whole scene of kind of, I don't think John lives in that world, but there you go.
Well, okay, but then saw a vagabond king wear a stylophone crown.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a thing. Apparently this song was actually inspired when Richie Sambora, the guitarist, was like in his limo and drove past a homeless person and felt really bad. So they probably did see a vagabond king in a styrofoam crown and went, shit, we're doing okay.
Yeah, we're doing
Let's
right.
write a song about how bad everybody else is doing.
Yeah, a bit like Phil Collins, Another Day in Paradise.
And this is a big one. Do you think Jon Bon Jovi has ever lost all faith in his God, in his religion too? Has he ever told the angels they could sing their songs to someone new?
I don't know what his position on faith is. I know he went to a Catholic private school for some of his schooling because I Googled that.
We'll never know about him wrestling, but I do know that comes from the song Something to Believe In, which was actually the first song written for the album when ironically, they'd just come off tour for Keep the Faith. He was on holiday in some Caribbean island, and apparently he just couldn't stop writing, and this was the real him coming out. So it does sound like maybe he was a bit worn out from the tour, and then was a bit questioning everything and going, but don't believe in heroin. I mean, I've never been a smackhead, but I do enjoy a joint every now and again. Is that how can I enjoy the dope? I can imagine him, watching his heart turn to stone and feeling he's walking this wicked world alone because he's probably just come from all this adrenaline and all this adoration, and then
he's having a big
wind down.
He's having a big tour come down.
I don't know. I feel he may well have questioned his religion too.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of rabbit holes as a result of that. Such was my distrust of him at this point after I'd gone through all this. I'm so poor and you're not. There's a lyric in My Guitar Lies Bleeding in My Arms. I'll have my cigarette and then turn out the lights. And I was like, does Jon Bon Jovi smoke? And so fascinating fact is, and this is how not rock and roll he can be portrayed as, of course, is he did start smoking because he was on the set of Moonlight and Valentino and he started smoking, but he then gave up smoking a few years later because his insurance premiums were too high as a smoker. Rock and roll, John. It's all about the insurance premiums.
That's so interesting. I'm pretty sure I've seen footage of him smoking. I thought he was very much like a boss-style, clean-living, hard-working, very committed to his craft, and that's mainly how he likes to come across. But there was one particular documentary, which I think probably came out maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 even, where he's being interviewed in grainy black and white in some noisy, late London restaurant, and he's got a very large glass of wine, and I'm pretty sure he's got a fag on as well. And he's ranting about the state of the world, and he does look like a man with some angst. And I also know that Tico the Hitman Torres, the drummer, definitely smokes because when I was 15 years old and I went out to buy the album Crush, I was so disappointed to see a small image of just a zoomed-in hand and a cigarette that I was going to take it back to our price and ask for a refund.
Oh, Rob!
I would have already copied the album, so it'd be a way to get my £10 back. Yeah.
But the fact is, and this does play into their kind of squeaky clean corporate image, we're talking about, which one of them smoke, rather than, which one of them have almost died 6 times through heroin overdoses. We're in that world of kind of rock and roll excess. They might have the old pack of fags occasionally.
Well, you say that, but then there's a reason that there are 4 pieces on this album, and we're a 5-piece on Keep the Faith, because at the end of the Keep the Faith tour, they finally fired the long-standing bassist Alec John Such for basically just not keeping his shit together. I think there was too much booze, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah, but bass players, they're expendable. Always happens.
I do think in the 80s, in the Slippery When Wet New Jersey, height of their American fame, when they dropped these 2 blockbuster platinum selling records but were touring incessantly. I do think they were probably living pretty rock and roll at that point. But I think around this time they were kind of clearing up. They'd been in the band 10 years, they were becoming older, they were settling down, which is another funny fact about this album. For all the heartbreak on it, obviously the other songwriter, because you need to understand that 10 of these 12 songs were co-written with Richie Sambora, the guitarist. I think his contribution is often overlooked, and one of the rare reasons I think their recent work of the last 12 years since he was booted from the band is lacking so much soul. But in December of 94, when they're working this album, they took a bit of time out and actually relocated the recording from New York, Woodstock, and John's home to LA because Richie was just married Heather Locklear, of all people.
Okay, so I refer you to being a university student getting into the Smiths and the Cure. Who's Heather Locklear? No idea.
Have you seen Wayne's World?
Yes. Oh, her. Okay, right. Yeah, all right, fine. Yeah. That makes more sense. So I got 2 more things to say about the lyrics. One is, in Hearts Break and Even, the lyrics, the sheets got tangled in the mess we made. There, in the stains, we remain.
Oh! This is funny because you're not even landing on the grossest lyric on the album.
Okay, go on.
The European and Japanese markets, I believe, got an extended version with 2 extra tracks. The closing track of which, one of my favourite, has the line, "You were giving me head in this creaky old bed in the old something hotel."
Too much information.
So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Self-edit. Goodness sake, John. The final thing I was going to say, the lyrics to Diamond Ring completely ring true. There's all of this, oh God, I'm so poor, and oh, I'm so heartbroken. And Diamond Ring, musically and lyrically, is actually, for me, the only bit that touches me.
No! You're hinting at the reveal, which we're already putting off for too long. It's interesting you bring up that song, Dave. What one thing have you noticed that holds all these songs together?
Well, with the exception of Diamond Ring, they're North American rock. Don't know.
Obviously, Bon Jovi are known for big, huge, happy, anthemic, uplifting anthems. Whether it's Living on a Prayer, whether it's My Life, whether it's Have a Nice Day, the latter 2 essentially being shameless rewrites of the former. However, I would argue every song on this is essentially a song of angst and
misery,
unhappiness,
and
misery, apart from the final 2. And this is why, as I say, I'm familiar with the 14-track European release, which had an extra 2 tracks tagged on the end, which are also not content. And now I've had to live with this new, complete 12-track album where essentially you've got 10 songs of complaining about the world, and then one of, I'll do whatever for your baby, and one of, you're my girl, I've got you.
Yeah.
I want to end on the fuck it, the world won't conform to my views, all I want is everything, followed by Bit of Wine, another breakup song, of which there was already half a dozen on this album. So, yeah, I don't think there's any other Bon Jovi album on this planet that has more than 2, max 3, possibly only 1, less than cheerily content songs. Even the ballads are upbeat, whereas this album is completely clouded by discontent. And there's no way this wasn't shaped in some way by the onslaught of grunge, right?
Right.
Bon Jovi were deeply uncool in 1995. They were everything you were imagining, this corporate rock behemoth, which had been picked out of the conversation by Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, et al., right?
Yeah.
And, this is the closest they've got to doing a grunge record in many ways. You might think that it's kind of cynical to write these songs of these everyman anthems with a little bit more depth than just flag waving, but maybe this was tapping into the Springsteen influence they had all along, and maybe they were in a kind of transitional stage themselves. In any case, Dave, we can't put this off any longer. I think this is a great rock and roll album. What did you actually think of it?
It's very well played. They're very talented, they're very professional, but substandard Springsteen was a phrase that came to my mind. I liked the first 2 tracks, and then I just thought, this sounds like a corporate rock band who are very good trying to be just a little bit darker than normal, but I don't think they're making a very good gist of it, and you did ask me what I actually thought, and that is what I actually think, which is a shame because you clearly have a huge history with this album. But I just found this to be conservative music with a bit of Springsteen-like lyrics sprinkled in, so it didn't do it for me, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Okay, I quit. I'm out. No, I mean, okay, let me retort on both a personal and objective standpoint. First of all, there's no way I can be objective about this album. Probably heard it 100 times between the ages of 10 and 13 and haven't really listened to it since. Okay. So that's why this last week or two has actually been quite refreshing, because I've come back to it with fresh ears. And yeah, I found some of those lyrics, especially things like Hey God, that I probably thought were profound when I was 11, a little bit silly now, but I have still enjoyed being bathed in this music that's so familiar to me, to knowing every lyric, and to, I think the music still really holds up. This record was something that formed a very formative part in my life, and I therefore lack all objectivity. Right. Having said that, like I said, I do think it fulfills a very unique point in their discography. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is just because, I mean, for me, it's just a fantastic guitar album. I think Richie sounds amazing. Like, it was one of those albums I listened to and looked forward to the solos and could hum every note, and they seemed incredibly melodic and incredibly emotive. And I think it sounds really nice. It's well produced. 80s Bon Jovi sounds like 80s Bon Jovi. It's dated. This sounds dated in a 90s way, but the 90s are far more palatable to us in the same way the 60s and 70s still sound better today than the 80s did. I feel like the 90s sound especially palatable. If anything, the 90s sound, because you had the high production value that was lacking in the 60s and 70s, but a retro aesthetic. So it's kind of a timeless sound.
The sound it most reminded me of was, the big late 80s, early 90s Aerosmith albums. Pump, Permanent Vacation, Get a Grip.
Good reference, but I think Permanent Vacation, as in the 1987 Aerosmith album, is still in that era, and then Pump in 1989 is the transition, and that's why by the time you get to Keep the Faith in 92, Bon Jovi are starting to sound cool. They've traded all those ugly 80s shredder guitars for Strats and tube amps, and you're getting this kind of bluesy classic sound, which I think has actually aged really well. Yeah. It's also interesting you bring up Springsteen, because going back to it now as an adult, I feel like there's a synergy between this and The River, which I guess The River was Springsteen's 5th album. This is their 6th, but it's that whole thing of like, you had all those defiant, let's get out of town, let's be young and free songs, and then you kind of revisit the characters a bit later, and real life has caught up with them.
Yeah, as Springsteen said about The River, he wanted to write an album about where the people on Born to Run had gone and what they were doing next. Right. Yeah.
And actually, John has said that Lie to Me is kind of imagining Tommy and Gina 10 years on. Tommy and Gina from Living on a Prayer. So I do think there's a maturity there, which arguably there's a different kind of maturity to their modern work. But I think this is a sweet spot. I can't pretend I'm not a little bit hurt that you're not sharing in my nostalgia trip that you weren't there for, Dave. You weren't there growing up, and you couldn't play me your cool Ultravex records, so I was stuck with corporate rock. But were there any songs that did stand out to you as you liking? Because you say the first 2 grabbed you. I kind of feel like the first 4, especially, form a little bit of a suite. I think that's like a perfect EP almost.
So I do feel bad now, but. So it started, dear God, that's a great rocker.
A little bit heavy, but not quite heavy enough. Like, the funny thing that you turn it down, when you put it on for your mum, but you can turn it up a little bit when the next song comes on.
And Some for the Pain, the song is quite upbeat, but the lyrics are miserable as hell.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, give me something for the pain, but it's not really. But it's fine. It's a good song.
Yeah, no, it's a great pop banger. I love that bridge, that Stone sus4 thing, like da 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 da. And that's another thing about this album. I think all the songs are clearly being workshopped to death, because they've always got a good verse and a good chorus, but there's often a pre-core, and there's invariably, I think in pretty much every song, there's a bridge of some kind. Even if the bridge is quite perfunctory, they make sure there's a kind of third or fourth musical idea, so that when you go back to the chorus, it's even more powerful. You can tell that Desmond Child, their long-term kind of third songwriter, features on a few of them, but you can just tell like some work has been done on this. Okay, then This Ain't a Love Song. Now, where do you sit on this?
This is where it started to go wrong for me, because it does sound like the ballads off those Aerosmith albums I talked about. They're too big to be ballads. The sound's too big. Maybe that's just me, but it's kind of stadium rock ballad. Doesn't work for me.
I kind of hear you, and when I'm revisiting the album, that's the one that I've had the most urge to skip. I feel like it's
Okay.
maybe too early in the album. Like they knew it was a single, so they wanted to front load it. Because this is very much an album
Okay.
made in the CD era, you can tell. Whereas all these songs would have been 3 or 4 minutes long if they're made in the 80s and crammed onto 45 minutes of vinyl, right?
Yeah.
Whereas there's still only 12 songs,
Yeah,
but they all run to at least, you know, around 5-minute mark. And
5, 6
they
minutes.
pushed it to like over an hour, and you can tell that's happened. I think it's a good, very pretty love song. I think I like the open, the harmony, the guitar descending line, and I really like it, the thing Richie does in the chorus. They're going down in 6 or whatever, like that's really cool. So I think I've allowed myself to enjoy it. Just the guitar playing and the aerobic stop-starts. But yeah, it's a little bit too soppy.
Did Bon Jovi ever do a Unplugged?
Yeah, so, well, okay, here's a fun fact. Bon Jovi have kind of credited themselves with inventing MTV Unplugged. So there was an award show in 88, 89 probably, I think on MTV, where they were invited on. I don't know if the whole band couldn't make it or they only had 10 minutes or something like that. And they just showed up with John and Richie with 2 guitars. And they famously did Prayer in this acoustic reading. It was really, really beautiful. And still actually my favourite version of Prayer. And they also did Dead or Alive. And and it's really amazing how it works. Like, because instead of the big chords, they brought out this like really beautiful kind of like this kind of aching thing to it.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? It was very like
Yeah.
it was beautiful.
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved it so much. In fact, I ripped that arrangement off for a song a band I was in. And actually, These Days is kind of the same chords, interestingly.
So that's just occurred to me that I actually some of it maybe I've been put off too much by production and some because this ain't a love song. That would be very interesting to hear just acoustically because there's just so much loud.
They did do like an acoustic album, but it was weird and overproduced, and it wasn't just like a live session. It was more like studio versions that have been rearranged and a bit more chill, called This Left Field's Right, taking the big 80s bangers and making them kind of safe and mummified. But it wasn't really like a complete acoustic reworking, which was a missed opportunity because... yeah, they are actually obviously very, very talented musicians, and the songs do hold up in that kind of Nebraska fashion, I think.
Sure. And I think that's important to say, God, he can sing.
Yeah, right?
I mean, bloody hell.
That's what I mean.
God, what a set of pipes. I mean, that's brilliant. And the guitarist, undeniably awesome guitarring all over
and great production and a solid rhythm section, and like, it's just... to me, it's it's a great rock and roll combo. Up, I'm not going to say it's up there with Mick and Keith or whatever, but I think John and Richie clearly had a really, really intuitive songwriting partnership, and that's the main thing. And there's always famous stories about how they did write Prayer and Dead or Alive, as with a couple of guitars in Richie's mum's
Lennon McCartney style.
Richie's mum's basement with the dryer going round and round supposedly, and their complementary talents, as in John can strum some nice big chords and Richie can shred the hell out of anything, but the way their voices play together, which you hear quite a lot on this album. I think a great example is Lie to Me, the way they hit the harmonies together when Richie comes in beneath him. I think it's a great vocal foil. If you know Wanted Dead or Alive, where he does the wanted, like they trade each other very, very, very well. So I think it was a really, really lucrative partnership. And on that note, I know that, as I understand it, These Days was more of a Richie coming in with a song almost done. And it sounds a bit more like a Richie song. If you listen to his great second solo album, Undiscovered Soul, which actually came out shortly after John's second solo album, they both went away and did a solo album after this.
No tension there. Which one sold the most?
Well, of course, John sold more. Undiscovered Soul apparently got to 174 in the US charts.
That's gonna hurt.
But it's a great album and very much in the production style and the songwriting style of These Days, like big anthemic kind of classic rock sound and his great voice. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that record. So I can believe that he came in with These Days, which I think that song's a banger. Come on.
Well, so These Days, did it not remind you hugely of Counting Crows Round Here?
Is that just because she came looking for some shelter with a suitcase full of dreams?
No, there's that. I mean, and I had to Google it. Round Here was couple of years before this. So yeah, Maria came from Nashville with a suitcase in her hand. She said she wants to meet a boy who looks like Elvis, and then Bon Jovi come up.
I guess she's trying
looking for some shelter with a suitcase full of dreams.
to motel room on a boulevard. Yeah.
But actually, it wasn't just the lyrics. It was the something about the chord progression or the melody. Something just reminded me musically of it as well.
I don't think the harmony's the same. For one, I think round here is in A minor, and this is very much a G major kind of G major E minor thing. But whatever. I don't think that is the same. It's funny because what it reminded me of, and it's actually impossible because it basically came out the same month.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if it was channeling Alanis Morissette and Ironic, with the like, Mr. Play It Safe was Face and Fry, packed his suitcase and said goodbye, like doing that whole character. And this like, Jimmy Shoes lost both his legs, and then in Van Gogh King, and then you've got the person that came from Nashville.
Yeah.
The way you're veering off a cast of I think 3 or 4 characters in both songs who did something.
Sure.
In this case, not ironic, just tragic. Yeah. I should point out, which I should have pointed out, the reason we're talking about this now, Dave, is because this album turns 30 years old this year, and I couldn't resist.
Yes.
Fun fact: Bon Jovi's album came out 2 weeks after Alanis Morissette's best-selling "Jagged Little Pill."
Yeah, so that's just
it's just a complete coincidence.
Yeah. Me trying to get rid of memories of Round Here aside, These Days clearly one of the top 4 songs on the album, along with Dear God, Something for the Pain and Diamond Ring.
Well, why don't you tell me why Diamond Ring grabs you so much?
Because it's completely different. Well, you've already pointed out that, after all that misery, it's the only upbeat one. I wouldn't be surprised to find out if you said, they recorded the whole album in one studio with one producer, and then they went and did this with another producer with another studio. It's got a whole different sound and feel to it.
Bingo, you're completely right.
There you go.
So this song was apparently written back in 1988 for the New Jersey album, and they tried to record it then, couldn't get it right. Then they tried to record it 4 years later for Keep the Faith, couldn't get it right. Then they recorded it for These Days in the initial sessions, wasn't working, and apparently they just recorded it like late in the day in LA, just started from scratch, live in the studio. Like it's a live vocal playing along with a guitar. It's interesting because as I said, it's one of the 2 happy songs on the album, but it's kind of basically a minor chord blues, right? The verse is basically a blues progression, and then obviously it's got a nice major chorus, but it's not that major. It's very, very stark. And I think this song shows that they would have done a bloody wonderful MTV Unplugged, clearly.
It's got a late night sultry bar song kind of feel, but it's got that magic to it. For me, anyway, it's got a kind of magic. Can't put my finger on it, but I really like. I can listen to that and not think it's Bon Jovi, big stadium band. I just go, that is a cool song, really well done, love it. It's got that sparkle dust, which I didn't find on, which I didn't have in the rest of the album. Is there a Bon Jovi album that's more like that? Is what I've said. And I don't suppose there is.
This is that album, sadly.
Okay. Well, they achieved what they wanted to do for 3.5 minutes at the end. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, so if you like that one, I'd like to know how you feel about aside from the big ballad we've already discussed, which is a big ballad, it's not quite one. There are, I would say, 4 very kind of sultry, late night, smoky misery songs. Where do you sit on Lie to Me, My Guitar Lies Bleeding, It's Hard Letting You Go, and Something to Believe in? They're all Dark Night of the Souls. Come on.
They are Dark Night of the Souls, but again, whether it's the production or whatever, they didn't grab me as Hard Night of the Souls. I just couldn't get over the soundscape of them. So
I think It's Hard Letting You Go is arguably a little bit. It's maudlin, but doesn't really go anywhere. I think that's one that John wrote on his own for the soundtrack to a movie he was acting in, Moonlight and Valentino. I think Something to Believe in, really, really powerful, and I think he does ask some genuine questions. Again, that's one he wrote on his own. I think Lie to Me is this fantastic, like bringing the story forward from Tommy and Gina and the vocals between them, and another lovely, lovely, lovely solo over the John's hey. But the one that really stands out is My Guitar Lies Bleeding. Like, for one, having that as a title is brave as F.
Well, so he so wanted to say weeping, it's like, it's such a, to say my guitar is doing this, it so flows back to my guitar gently weeps, right? And he's gone bleeding instead. Do you think?
He's riffing on a theme, and I think bleeding is a more powerful image. I mean, I think it's wonderful. And apparently this moody late night cigarette burning, depressive moment, and apparently, again, it came from that. Like Bed of Roses, the song we discussed where he confesses all his infidelities, it was apparently written in the basement again. He did this thing of, I'm going to write about not being able to write, and the guitar being his loyal companion, the only one who's still there for him, which I think is pretty wonderful. And it goes somewhere,
Yeah.
man. There's that mental riff in the middle, which has that kind of slightly weird drum pattern where it kind of emphasizes and goes double time, and then speeds up, and then emphasizes the second or third beat, but not the first. And again, a blinding solo. I think this song is. I've never sat down to rank them, but this and the title track would. Yeah, everything that should turn Bon Jovi haters around, or at least show them that there is a little bit more depth to the band. Given that it's meant to be a song about writing to write, because this is one lyric that we didn't make our game earlier, and I'm almost glad it didn't, because it's almost too profoundly bleak. Staring out the window is such a long way down. I'd like to jump, but I'm afraid to hit the ground. I mean, anyone who's ever felt that way, you don't think you're going to find profundity in a Bon Jovi song, and perhaps it's hitting the nail too on the head, but sometimes those messages really, really touch people. And spending a little bit of time on Reddit recently, reading about this, what people think of this album, I do know that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people that have been through tough shit, and just because their record collection isn't as nuanced and pretentious as yours, Dave, they found solace in this music. No, but just because they don't know who Elliott Smith is.
You know, I get that Bon Jovi's music is kind of set up to be popular to a huge amount of people, and it is. And I get that, and therefore I don't want to in any way kind of undermine people's enjoyment of it, because it is fucking great on one level. It's fucking awesome, brilliant that they've managed to do that. I've never been, I hope not, a musical snob saying, oh, this is all, you know, you shouldn't be into this, because I mean, hell, I like Billy Joel, for Christ's sake. Coolness shouldn't come into it. You know, you read into music in all sorts of different ways, and if Bleeding My Arms and other songs on this album have done great things for people, that's all cool. It just didn't do that for me.
It's really good you say that, Dave, because actually then we come on to If That's What It Takes, where...
If that's what it takes to sell CDs by the bucket load in the 90s, then that's what I'll do.
My objection to it was almost an upbeat song on a very bleak album, but it's got that great bridge that goes, so when you feel like jumping, just when your heart starts pumping, when you're standing on that ledge, staring over the edge, I'll be there to talk you down. I'll be there before you hit the ground.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is kind of the flip side of My Guitar Lies Bleeding. It's like, okay, it sounds like he's basically offering to support a romantic partner who he's clearly really, really enamored with, but is going through tough shit. And he's basically saying, that's what it takes, that's what I'll do. But to me, musically, that's nothing compared with probably the third best song on the album, Hearts Breaking Even. What a breakup banger that is. The guitar intro and the first line, it's been a cold night tonight. I mean, it hasn't been a better first line in rock and roll. I mean, he's like a soul singer. And again, he got this big anthemic, uplifting chorus, essentially saying, it's all right, it doesn't matter, you know, fold the curtains and say goodbye. We're both going through a shit time, but we've just got to part ways and be cool with each other. Again, that's a really kind of positive, negative message, and quite a mature statement for a pop rock song.
Yeah, and you know, because they were poodle rock, right?
Oh,
yeah,
totally.
No, and I guess because I'm coming from it completely from afar, I'm not seeing that evolution and journey, and I can see if you've got into them through that 80s, big hair, girls are girls, la 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 thing, and then you're presented with this, you're either going to get turned off by it or go, wow, that is a massive progression of maturity in songwriting and everything that you weren't expecting from a formerly poodle rock band. I get that.
To be honest, Dave, I do still wonder if you're allowing your preconceptions of, you know, Bon Jovi the band and Jon Bon Jovi the person to stand in the way. And I'm not the only one that feels that way, because on those rare times when I find myself reading something about Bon Jovi on Ultimate Classic Rock website, when you scroll at the end, you always land on like every Bon Jovi album ranked is the next article, and I have to scroll to the bottom. And I've done that 2 or 3 times, if only to feel reaffirmed by the credible journalist who completely agrees with me. So to quote, "These Days stands in stark contrast to the rest of Bon Jovi's catalogue. It is an organic, ambiguous, and contemplative collection of songs whose characters are confronted with desperation from societal and domestic issues beyond their control. If it was made by any other artist, These Days might have been acclaimed as one of the best albums of the 90s. I'd like to give a shout out to my buddy there, Anthony Kosminski, who has correctly ascertained and seen through the hype to realise this album's genuine artistic merit. It's a shame you couldn't do the same.
I can't convince you that I did listen to this with a genuinely open mind. My first time I listened to it was I was ironing. My son, your nephew, was reading a book on the sofa, and about halfway through I said, Stan, what did you think? And he said, It's all right. I mean, it's a good record to read a book to. So he enjoyed it. And whether he's full of the same production value prejudice as I am, yeah, it's that. See, I'm just digging a bigger hole for myself. I could see myself enjoying this kind of as background music, but God, that's not what people want it to be, and think of it. So that's probably just made it worse for myself, hasn't it?
I think it's really fascinating you're using a child's perspective as compared to your own. So now maybe it's a good time to talk about my relationship with Bon Jovi and offer my own defense that it began probably at age 9 and that I encountered this album at age 10. It was one of the first 3 or 4 albums I'd ever encountered in my life. So I think probably the first proper album I got was Get a Grip by Aerosmith. And I would have got the best of Bon Jovi, Crossroads. And I couldn't afford many CDs. But then that summer, when These Days came out, my sister, who has a dad who isn't my dad or your dad, lent me a copy of These Days, which I taped. And I played that tape in the car on my Walkman and out loud when I was allowed. Pretty much every time I ever went anywhere incessantly for a year or two. Then when, I was 12 or 13 and someone introduced me to Nirvana and Green Day and Radiohead and everything else, I quickly parked that. But along the way, it was also a live VHS called Live in London, filmed on the These Days tour, which I must say probably did as much to enamour me with Bon Jovi and especially Richie's guitar playing than anything. I did retain Jovi as a bit of a guilty pleasure. The worst part about this VH video was it was recorded during Bon Jovi's historic 3-night stand at Wembley Stadium, which, as I say, whilst they were completely out of favour and not shifting any records in the US, this was their commercial peak in Europe, and I would say therefore critical peak, which is why I still find it boggling that the album is really overlooked now. They don't really play these songs live at all. They've covered Twist and Shout by the Isley Brothers more often than they played the title track, and that's by far the most played song. It's really sad. In any case, the bittersweet part was this VHS I was in love with. My sister was at one of those Wembley shows, and I was so jealous. I was so gutted and so in love with the band at that point that she promised she'd take me the next time they toured, on the proviso that I start using an electric toothbrush, because I was 10 years old. She came good on the promise, and, in the year 2000, when they toured Crush, which was kind of their comeback album in the States, propelled by It's My Life, most flagrant Living on a Prayer rewrite, ever. And I remember finding it really, really odd that they were playing a song like Bed of Roses, something that I would cry in the mirror to as a heartbroken teen. And everyone's kind of singing along like a drunken beer anthem, and I had a real kind of accusing moment. And then when Bon Jovi came back 3 years later to play Hyde Park, touring Bounce is a fantastic record that nobody seems to love. Their heavy post 9/11, it's probably the closest to These Days in that sense record. I did, not without some irony, go and see them in Hyde Park with my high school girlfriend at the time. And we had a great time. Yeah. Tongues a little bit in cheek, but also, at that point, it was a established guilty pleasure. You'd hope that's where my relationship with Bon Jovi ended. However, they've just kept cropping up to the point where when I came home from living abroad, exactly 10 years after seeing Bon Jovi in Hyde Park with that girlfriend, I was staying with that girlfriend. We were no longer together, but I was, sleeping awkwardly in a double bed.
Spare us the details.
Straining myself. And she won a pair of tickets to see Bon Jovi in Hyde Park.
Wow! You had to go.
On the radio. So we had to go. And then hilariously enough, when I was working for a newspaper in the Middle East, 2 years after that, they came to Abu Dhabi. I was professionally employed to review the show. And I even got to go backstage and go on stage and look at all the guitars, which would have been really, really cool had they not fired Richie 2 years earlier. So I was looking at all Phil X's guitars. I touched John's acoustic. I walked up to John's mic, and then obviously the people that got there really early, that were super fans, started screaming because they thought someone was coming up to the mic to say or do something. And obviously I was just me.
That's super cool.
Yeah. I remember asking the roadie, what's changed since Richie's left the band? Because at this point it was still quite fresh. It was quite a big deal that this unknown shredder guy's taking his place. And they were like, different guitars. He was not going to give me anything. I wanted to impress him. I have to tell you, though, the show was pretty bad. They didn't play a single ballad. They'd given up playing ballads altogether, and John's voice was really, really evidently creaking. There was a lot of backing vocals sung by the rest of the band. They're getting more and more people to do the vocal lifting. They're lowering the keys of a lot of stuff. He was letting the audience sing a lot of the high notes. And when he did go for the high notes, the 80s stuff like Bad Name was just sounding bad.
I was going to ask about that, but so the other thing I do know about Jon Bon Jovi, what people say is, oh golly, but I mean his voice was so good, and his top range was amazing. You can't maintain that into your 50s, presumably 60s. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if he's gone down an octave.
So the whole thing with this big documentary that came out last year to celebrate the 40th anniversary, Thank You and Good Night, the Bon Jovi story, it's all centered around the bookend of him losing his voice and having operation, trying to fix it and doing all these warm-ups and everything he's doing to try and keep it. And he's basically, presenting it as the ultimate sob story and how he can't do the thing he loves, which, first of all, I think is a little bit rich coming from a man who has got to do what he loved for 40 years and become very rich, very successful doing so.
Sure. If I had his problems.
He's had a good run. He's now 63 years old. I'm sorry, not everyone gets to meet Mick Jagger. And you were so virtuoso in your early days, you're always going to be held up to that. And he can kind of hold it together on all the new kind of countryist, low acoustic, kind of semi-spoken stuff they write. Sure. It's just he can't do the hits. Stop doing the hits, mate. Go solo. Just play to a slightly smaller audience.
And suck it up.
Do different music. But the other thing I found galling is he's kind of recasting it all as like he's doing all this to solve the problem. But the upshot of that is he's known all along that he's been shortchanging the fans for the last 10 years where he hasn't been able to do it.
Yeah.
It was very, very evident when I saw them in 2015 and I wrote about it and this other guy wrote about it and it's been documented. So then to kind of owning it and rewriting the narrative as his heroic struggle, it would have been fairer to kind of admit this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Rather than just carry on regardless and bank the paycheck.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, Rob, for...
I just threw a lot of incredibly nerdy information about the least cool band in the world at you. Is there anything else you want to know about them?
But this is the amazing thing about music, isn't it? Because it's so much about emotions and environment, etc. So the fact that you've just told me that story about what this album meant to you already means that this album means something different to me. If that makes sense. So it's like, yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's no longer is These Days, it's that album that I had to listen to and I didn't.
It's the first rock and roll album, probably the first album of any music that I truly, truly, truly love.
Yeah. And now I know that.
I probably wasn't ready for the Pixies or the Who or any of the bands that went on to be important to me.
No, of course not.
At 10 years old.
Yeah. No, I mean, God, yeah. Kudos if I think of the bands that,
Yeah, Dave, what were you listening to at 10?
Boney M. I was trying to think the first proper album I ever heard was Boney M's Night Flight to Venus.
There you go.
So that's my version of that. And that hasn't necessarily struck a chord or left me. But knowing what it means to you, already the album, I won't ever be able to listen to it without that emotional resonance going on. So that's already changed my perspective on it, which is nice. I guarantee you, for that reason, I will have to listen to it again.
I mean, convention dictates you should also ask you what else you should listen to, but I feel like that's irrelevant at this point.
Their biggest album is still Slippery When Wet, is it?
Oh, without a doubt. So Potted History, two kind of pretty good sellers but quite undeveloped kind of hair rock albums, the self-titled and 7,800 Degree Fahrenheit. No one really cares. Slippery and Wet, massive, propelled by Prayer, with Wanted Dead or Alive, with Bad Name, and with a ballad which is Never Say Goodbye. Also, Let It Rock is on there. It's a banger. I think most people would actually say the follow-up, which was hurried out barely a year later, New Jersey, is actually a stronger album. Bad Medicine, Born to Be My Baby, the ballad, I'll Be There For You. The production's a little bit less noxious. It's, I would say, a very strong album. But then that kind of closed the bookend on their 80s hair metal period. And then they took a big break, fell out. Both Richie and John did their first solo album, That's Stranger in This Town, for Richie, and the Young Guns 2 soundtrack for John. He also went off and tried to become a Hollywood star by acting in that movie, and I think probably around now that he was in Friends and stuff, he had aspirations. But they did eventually regroup after, I guess, relatively subdued solo success to make Keep the Faith, which I think is kind of their first mature album. It paves the way between the 80s production, 80s anthemic nature to These Days quite nicely. So it has songs like I Believe and Keep the Faith, which are very big and fist waving, but they've lost that sheen, and they've got a little bit of angst to them. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of edge. There's also famously a 10-minute song called Dry County on Keep the Faith, which is just genuinely musically impressive. And there's like really fun songs like I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, In These Arms. I think it's contender for their second best record by far. Then, as discussed, they made These Days, walked away and did solo albums and didn't talk to each other for another 5 years. They'd lost the zeitgeist completely. Then they came back with Crush, which is a very strong album, which has been completely overshadowed by the success of It's My Life. I think it's got some other really, really great songs on. Just Older is a song about just getting old. Two Stories Town, Next 100 Years. It's okay. It's a kind of sonically a little bit treading the same kind of water, but toned down. Not essential. And then why I say Next is going to be divisive. And it probably says something, the fact that I heard it when it came out, so I was still only 17. But I really like Bounce, this record that most people don't like. And it's post 9/11 kind of angsty album. Richie's put away the Strats and started playing shredding guitars again. There's a lot of drop D and a lot of big riffs. And it has that These Days style angst. Opening 2 tracks, Undivided and Everyday, are just like bangers. Then there's really, really nice songs like Misunderstood. I think it's one of the prettiest ballads they ever did. So, yeah, I mean, I'd probably squeeze that in the top 5 even. And then, to be honest, I kind of stopped listening. I'm pretty sure I bought Have a Nice Day, the 2005 album, in a supermarket. And I think that's the last one I paid money for. And it just, I'm losing interest by this stage. I'm 20. I've got better things to listen to. And then I remember buying the 2007 country album, Lost Highway, which was clearly a shameless way to sell physical project to the few people that still bought CDs, i.e., middle America country fans. And I bought that for £3 and FOP and just that I'd had enough. So I haven't really listened to any Bon Jovi since then, apart from when I had to review Burning Bridges for work, and I gave it a measly 2 stars.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So add all that lot. I've never heard Slippery When Wet. I probably can't go to my grave without having heard Slippery When Wet. Now I'm on the subject of Bon Jovi.
I mean, you've got to hear Slippery. So if you want the Asphamic stuff, Slippery is an essential listen, and you'll know half the songs already. As I say, New Jersey is a stronger album that sounds better. I think, honestly, Keep the Faith is more up your street, especially if you like the title track already. And yeah, I've got a massive soft spot for Bounce.
All right, that's my homework. I've got one more question. Much like when we discussed Jethro Tull, after, in their case, 46 years, lead singer kicks guitarist out. In this case, what happened? Was it kicking out? Was it a Lindsey Buckingham Fleetwood Mac? What the heck happened?
I mean, there's lots of different stories, and the way it was dealt with in the doc is quite controversial. Supposedly, he just kept skipping gigs, and that's why they got this guy Phil X to learn some songs. So before he was kicked out, this guy Phil X had already learned the parts and done a few fill-ins. I think it's pretty well known this is down to alcoholism. But supposedly they had like a limo outside his door to take him to the airport to get him to the tour for the tour he was the 2013 tour, but Richie didn't show. Richie says it's because there was beef with him and John and he wasn't ready or whatever. But the fact they had Phil X on the tour ready to go, so it's a bit of he said, she said. Richie also, when he secretly or knowingly filmed them filming him for the documentary, which he was interviewed for, he doesn't appear very much considering he was, the principal co-songwriter of, the first 30 years. So he recorded the whole 40-minute thing on Twitter or whatever and said, look, this has been edited a certain way. This is my whole thing. But I think it's pretty evident that Richie's not in great shape. He hasn't ever come out with a solo album. I think he managed to do a best of that had 4 original tracks. He keeps talking about new music. But last year, he appeared on a guitar podcast called Shred with Shrifty, which is hosted by Chris Shrifty, he plays guitar in the Foo Fighters. It's a super nerdy thing where basically the guitarist who played a famous solo shows the guy how to play the solo. Okay. But Richie kind of came on seemingly, either very under influence or maybe just completely hungover or out of it. He's just rambling away and telling all these stories. He's talking about how they're pretty wasted when they recorded the solo in question, which was Wanted Dead or Alive, which for a long time I would have told you was my favourite guitar solo. But he couldn't play it himself. And to be fair, I think the internet came to Richie's defense and said, why did you put this out, dude? And after less than a week, it got stripped from the internet. And then later, weirdly, he got invited back they clearly went to do a do-over, and this time he talked about a really nerdy song from 7,800 Degree Fahrenheit that even I'm not super familiar with, and with some shreddy solo, and he was a bit more together but still couldn't play his own solo. So yeah, I think Richie's probably not in good shape, which is a shame because he was my first guitar hero. And it's not Bon Jovi without him, and even though Phil X is a very able player, either he can't or won't play note for note Richie. He doesn't. And even if he could, it wouldn't be right. So I think at this point, it's been so long that they've added 2 other guitarists and a percussionist and fleshed it out and made it more of a kind of E Street Band thing with Jon in the centre and a cast of characters around him, rather than like Mick and Keith thing. But, Richie's always said he wants to go back, and I guess he's just not ready. But also, him coming back, he'd have to take a slice of the pie, right? So there's that as well. I think throughout the whole messy contractual stuff, it also emerged that the rest of the band were kind of actually on the books as hired employees.
Harsh.
Which comes down to one of the central weirdnesses about the band. I mean, do you know why they're called Bon Jovi?
Well, because his surname wasn't quite Bon Jovi, but it's similar. Bon Jovi or something.
So it's a little bit strange because basically Runaway, his first hit, he recorded it like after hours in the Hit Factory, the recording studio he was working at. He was recording loads of demos, right? He recorded about 20. And somehow this one took off and became a radio hit before he had a band.
Right.
So because he had a smash international hit called Runaway, to this day, the version of Runaway on the album doesn't feature any of the band.
Right.
They had to form a band very quickly. So on the one hand, he was famous as Jon Bon Jovi for this single.
Yeah.
On the other, Van Halen.
Yeah.
Which is named after Eddie Van Halen. Yeah. And I think is the drummer also Van Halen? Is it two
something
Van Halen?
Like that, yeah.
So I think they were trying to capitalize on that. But what this means is, to this day, when you're at Bon Jovi gigs, half the people are talking about he, not they. Because he's called Jon Bon Jovi, people still get confused about whether it's a band or not. Yeah, and that's why I've always wondered why he doesn't just go solo. But clearly on some level, he does still need that brand recognition. It's like, even if you're Freddie Mercury or Kurt Cobain, maybe you'd still sell more records with Queen and Nirvana.
Well,
I don't know.
You would. I mean, that's just the nature of things.
You must.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
So on some level, he needs to keep this, I think they call it the corporation now. And it has become, as I say, this kind of big enterprise that's basically been propping up his dwindling vocals for all this time as best it can. But they're all clearly, Jon is calling the shots. He's the CEO of that enterprise, and I don't think Richie's coming back anytime soon.
He's the CEO of the enterprise, so in every single way, no longer just 2 checks from the streets. Bless him.
I've got to ask you now, you've been listening to this ironing. I don't know if you ever will listen to this album again, but you say because now you know how important it is to me, you might.
I will.
Where is the best place in the world to hear this album?
Okay, so no, I absolutely Rob, because I kind of... Well, I owe it to our relationship to listen to it again in all sorts of ways. It's that kind of. I've got this image of you as a 10-year-old listening to. 10 years old, mate. That's really young to be listening to this kind of quite adult music. It's not completely adult music.
Hey, God, you were thinking about me.
Yeah, no.
You could tell I had problems if this was the.
Yeah, sure. If this
was the album I gravitated towards.
Sure, no, absolutely. So that puts it a whole. In terms of listening to it, well. Now you've pictured such an image of this as...
You need to be in the back seat with a cassette player. with our dad in the front. Is that it? At the wheel.
Yes. Let's see if we can get that happening. There's that way of doing it. The other way is it's a Long Dark Night of the Soul album, so I kind of feel I need to be in like a woodcutter's cottage somewhere in the east coast of America with whiskey late at night, having too many of them, just this on big headphones, giving it the full whack. I shall try and replicate that. I've got a long train journey coming up, so I'm going to be on a train with big headphones and a whiskey, listening as I travel to the north of England. And in case my wife ever listens to this, of course I won't be drinking that much whiskey, not with my high cholesterol.
She's not listening.
She's not listening, so it's fine.
She might be listening to the music if it makes the Hipster Dad Barbecue playlist.
Well, damned, dear God, something for the pain. That works on the Hipster playlist.
Okay, Dave, you need to redeem some credibility to our podcast schedule. What am I going to be listening to for the next episode?
Well, to the world's shame, it won't redeem credibility. Completely in the same vein of first album or artist, really, in this case, that meant anything to you. You are going to listen to Ultravox Vienna.
Oh, I know the title track. Cool.
Yeah, everybody knows the title track. Yeah. But the album, wow, that's going to be brilliant, because it is, in my memory. Right. We'll find out.
I'm excited.
We'll find out next time. Thanks for listening. If you have been, bye.